If intelligence built wealth, the smartest people in the room would always be the richest. So why do brilliant doctors, engineers, and executives go bankrupt, while a janitor with no financial education dies with millions in the bank? You assume money is a math problem. Spreadsheets, formulas, the right ratios. So you study the numbers, you read the reports, you think the smartest decision wins. But somehow, the people who understand money the least often end up wealthier than the people who understand it the most. That's because money was never really about math. It's about psychology. That's exactly what Morgan Housel's The Psychology of Money is about. In this video, we'll break down 5 key insights from the book: why intelligence has almost nothing to do with building wealth, why your personal history shapes your money decisions more than any spreadsheet ever could, why getting wealthy and staying wealthy require 2 completely opposite skills, why the most powerful force in finance has nothing to do with returns, and why the real goal of money was never the money at all. Let's get started. Act 1. Why smart people still go broke. A janitor named Ronald Reed worked at a gas station and swept floors for most of his life. He drove an old car. He wore the same coat for years. Nobody at his funeral suspected anything unusual. Then his will was read, and people learned he'd quietly built an $8 million fortune, almost all of it given away to his local hospital and library. Around the same time, a finance executive named Richard Fusconi, a man with degrees from elite universities, a former Wall Street vice chairman, filed for bankruptcy. He'd taken on debt to expand a mansion, leveraged his lifestyle the same way he leveraged deals, and when the financial crisis hit, it all came apart. Same world, same economy, wildly different outcomes. And the difference wasn't intelligence. Fusconi almost certainly knew more about finance in a technical sense than Reed ever did. He could explain interest rate models and valuation theory. But none of that mattered, because wealth doesn't reward what you know. It rewards what you do, repeated quietly for a long time. This is the first uncomfortable truth in the book. Financial success is not a hard science. It's a soft skill, where how you behave matters more than what you know. You'd expect the field of finance to work like physics, governed by clean laws that produce predictable outputs. But it behaves more like history, shaped by individual people making emotional decisions, copying what worked for others, sometimes getting lucky, sometimes paying for mistakes they never saw coming. That's why the smartest people on paper can still make terrible financial decisions. Intelligence doesn't cancel out fear. It doesn't cancel out greed. It doesn't cancel out the urge to compare your house to your neighbor's house. A genius who can't control his behavior around money will eventually be out-earned by an ordinary person who can. Act 2. Why your story isn't everyone's story. Once you accept that behavior beats intelligence, the next question becomes obvious. If everyone has access to the same basic information, why does everyone behave so differently with money? Housel's answer is simple but easy to miss. Nobody is crazy. Every person's relationship with money is shaped by a personal history that nobody else has lived through. Someone raised during a recession sees risk differently than someone raised during a boom. Someone who watched their parents lose a business sees debt differently than someone who watched their parents build one. 2 people can look at the exact same investment and make completely opposite, completely rational decisions, because rational to each of them means something different. Picture 2 people. One grew up in the 1970s, watching inflation eat away at savings and stocks swing wildly with no clear direction. The other grew up in the 2010s, watching the stock market mostly climb year after year, with brief dips that always recovered. Show them both the same investment opportunity today. One sees danger everywhere. The other sees opportunity everywhere. Neither of them is wrong. They're just running the simulation of their own life, not yours, not the textbooks. This explains something that frustrates a lot of people. Why financial advice that worked for one person fails completely for another. It's not that the advice was bad. It's that the advice was built from someone else's experience, someone else's fear, someone else's timeline. You inherited none of that. So borrowing someone else's financial playbook without understanding the experience behind it is like borrowing a coat that was tailored for somebody else's body. It might look fine on the hanger. It won't fit when you actually put it on. This is also why so much financial stress is silent. You compare your bank account to someone else's without knowing their history, their luck, their starting point, or their failures. You're not seeing the full picture. You're seeing a highlight reel and grading your behind-the-scenes footage against it. Act 3. Luck, risk, and the danger of copying winners. Once you understand that everyone's history is different, a more uncomfortable idea follows. Not every financial outcome is caused entirely by skill, and not every financial disaster is caused entirely by mistakes. Housel illustrates this with Bill Gates. Gates attended one of the only high schools in the world in 1968 with a computer students could actually use. The odds of that happening were astronomically small. His talent was real, but so was the circumstance. Now consider his childhood friend Kent Evans, equally brilliant, equally driven, who died in a mountaineering accident before he ever got the chance to build anything. Same talent, same opportunity, one outcome defined by genius, the other cut short by chance. This is the part most people skip when they study successful people. They study the decisions. They ignore the luck. And because they ignore the luck, they try to copy strategies that only work because of circumstances that will never repeat. Here's a clean way to picture it. Imagine two gamblers at separate tables, placing identical bets with identical odds. One wins, one loses. If you only watch the winner, you'd assume his strategy was brilliant. If you only watch the loser, you'd assume his strategy was reckless. But the strategy was the same. The dice rolled differently. Most financial outcomes sit somewhere between pure skill and pure luck, and the mistake is treating every result as proof of one or the other. This also means risk is harder to judge than people think, because risk is what doesn't happen to you until one day it does. Companies, careers, and personal fortunes can look stable for years, right up until a single unpredictable event, a recession, a lawsuit, a pandemic, an injury, removes everything that looked solid. Housel calls these tail events, the rare extreme outliers that end up driving the majority of long-term results. A handful of decisions, a handful of stocks, a handful of years account for most outcomes in a lifetime. Everything else is just noise around them. So the goal isn't to predict exactly which event will hit you. The goal is to build a financial life that can survive being wrong, because eventually, everyone is wrong about something. Act 4. Getting wealthy versus staying wealthy. This is where the book makes its sharpest distinction. Getting money and keeping money are two different skills, and most people only learn the first one. Getting money requires taking chances, being optimistic, and putting yourself out there. Keeping money requires the opposite: humility, fear of losing what you have, and an assumption that some of what you've built could disappear through bad luck or bad timing alone. Many people accumulate wealth by taking big swings, then lose it by continuing to swing big after they no longer need to. Housel points to investors who, instead of locking in life-changing gains, kept reaching for more, convinced their advantage would last forever, until a single bad bet erased years of progress. This connects to one of the most important ideas in the entire book. The highest form of wealth is the ability to do what you want, when you want, with who you want, for as long as you want. Not a number in an account, not a flashy purchase. Control over your own time. Housel calls this independence the ultimate dividend money pays, and it's the reason saving money matters, even when you have no specific goal for it. Most financial advice assumes you're saving for something: a house, a car, retirement. But some of the most powerful savings happen with no target at all, simply building a buffer against a future you can't predict. That buffer doesn't just protect your bank account, it protects your decision-making. People with savings can wait for good opportunities instead of being forced into bad ones out of desperation. People with no savings have to say yes to whatever shows up, even when it's a bad deal, because they have no room to say no. This is also why two people earning the same income can end up financially worlds apart. One spends to project wealth, buying the car, the watch, the bigger house, because status feels good immediately. The other spends less than they could, keeps the difference invisible, and lets it quietly compound. The first person looks rich. The second person is rich. Looking rich and being rich are not the same skill, and confusing the two is one of the most common ways smart, high-earning people end up with nothing. Act 5. The quiet power of compounding and enough. This brings us to the engine behind almost every great fortune in the book: And it isn't a brilliant insight or a perfectly timed trade. It's time. Warren Buffett's net worth is often treated as a story about stock-picking genius. But Housel points out something most people overlook. The vast majority of Buffett's fortune was built after he turned 50, not because his strategy suddenly improved, but because he had already been investing for decades by that point, letting the same modest returns compound quietly, year after year, for far longer than almost anyone else stayed in the game. His skill was real, but his real advantage was sustainability, staying invested through decades most people would have abandoned. This is the same plateau then breakthrough pattern that shows up in every form of compounding. Returns that look small and unimpressive for years can become enormous, but only if nothing interrupts the process. Most people don't fail at investing because they pick the wrong assets. They fail because they panic during the flat, uneventful years and pull out right before the compounding would have accelerated. But even compounding has a blind spot if you never decide when enough is enough. Housel describes traders and investors who had already won, who had more money than they could ever spend, and who still risked it all chasing more, not because they needed it, but because they couldn't define a finish line. Without a clear sense of enough, every gain just raises the bar for what counts as success, and the chase never actually ends. It can quietly destroy people who already had everything they needed. So the final lesson isn't a formula, it's a mindset shift. Stop measuring your financial life by someone else's scoreboard. Define what enough looks like for you. Specifically, honestly, before the market or your ego defines it for you. Save consistently, not because you're trying to hit a number, but because flexibility itself is the reward. Let time do the heavy lifting instead of trying to force fast results through big, risky moves. And remember that the entire purpose of money was never the money. It was buying yourself control over your own time, your own choices, and your own peace of mind. Because in the end, the people who win with money aren't always the smartest people in the room. They're the ones who understood that money is a game played with behavior, patience, and humility, not intelligence. And once you understand that, you stop trying to predict the market, and you start building a life that can survive it. Want the best guaranteed ROI on your time? Invest just one click into that subscribe button. It pays out dividends of financial knowledge every single week. If this video added value to your mental portfolio, hit the like button to let the algorithm know. Drop a comment below with your thoughts or questions, and share this with a friend who's building their wealth alongside you. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you in the next one.